seem to be perfectly matched with what is in the liturgical calendar today. And if this were a weekday, we'd be celebrating the martyrs of Uganda. But I'd like to share this with you because I think it's relevant to what the liturgy is saying to us today. These are the people who died in 1885 and also those who were killed in 1978. So first of all, in 1884, Mwanga became ruler, or Kabaka, of Buganda in Uganda. When 3 of his subjects, obeying a missionary's instruction, unwittingly disobeyed his orders, he had them executed. Yusufu, Lugalama, Mako Kakumba, and Nuwa Serwanga went to their deaths on the 31st of January, 1885. In November, Joseph Mikasa Balakudembe, a Roman Catholic courtier, was executed for protesting at the murder of Bishop James Hannington. The persecution reached its height in 1886 when some courtiers and palace officials refused Mwanga's advances. Mwanga was enraged that the Christians acknowledged a higher authority than the Kabaka and ordered their execution. 46 names are known, both Roman Catholic and Anglican, who were martyred. Most, led by Charles Mwanga, were burned alive on Ascension Day, June the 3rd, 1886. The last martyrdom was that of Jean-Marie Muzeidi in the following January. The description of the deaths of these Ugandans reads like a martyrdom narrative from the early Christian centuries. The churches in Uganda also came under extreme pressure during the presidency of Idi Amin and the second presidency of Obote in the 1970s and 1980s. Among those who lost their lives at this time was Archbishop Yanani Luwum. Christians in Uganda unite on this day to remember those who witnessed in their country for Christ, even unto death. So when they were recognized as martyrs by the Anglican Communion, and then they were also canonized by the Roman Catholic Church, and this was from the homily given by Pope Paul VI on that occasion in Uganda. Every time we utter the word martyr in the sense it has acquired in Christian hagiography, we should bring to our mind's eye a drama evoking horror and wonder. Horror because of the injustice which unlooses such a drama with the instruments of power and cruelty. Horror, again, because of the blood which is shed and of the death so unfeelingly inflicted. Wonder, then, because of the simple strength which submits without struggle or physical resistance to torment. Happy and proud to witness to the unconquerable truth of a faith which has fused itself with life. Life, however, dies, but faith lives on. We see brute as opposed to moral force. The first knowing in its very success defeat. The second, triumph in failure. Martyrdom, then, is a drama, an appalling drama, let it be said, but one rich in teaching. The unjust and evil violence which it brings about tends almost to be forgotten, while in the memory of centuries, the gentleness which makes the offering of self a sacrifice, a holocaust, remains with all its luster and attractiveness, a supreme act of love and faithfulness with regard to Christ, an example and a witnessing and enduring message to contemporary and future generations alike. Such is martyrdom. Such has been the glory of the Church through the centuries, and which we commemorate today. These African martyrs add a new page to that of the victorious men and women whom we call the martyrology, in which we find the most magnificent as well as the most tragic stories. The page that they add is worthy to take its place alongside those wonderful stories of ancient Africa, which we who live today, being of little faith, thought we should never see repeated. We're familiar with the lives of great saints, martyrs, and confessors of Africa, such as Cyprian, Felicity, and Perpetua, and the great Augustine. Who would have imagined that one day we should be adding to the list those names of Charles Mwanga, Matthias Mulumba Kalemba, and their 20 companions? Nor should we forget those of others of the Anglican communion who died for the sake of Christ. These martyrs of Africa have indeed laid the foundations of a new age. We should not dwell on the religious persecutions and conflicts, but rather on the rebirth of Christian and civil life that has begun. For from the Africa that was sprinkled with the blood of these martyrs, the first of this new age, and God willing, the last, so sublime, so precious was their sacrifice, there is emerging a free and independent Africa. Look at the first reading today from 1 Samuel. The next 10 verses, which we did not hear today, talk about when God does tell Samuel what it is that he's supposed to do. And he has the very difficult task of going to Eli and telling him the truth that God had given to him, which was to tell Eli that he and his sons were finished as far as God was concerned. Because Eli, as the priest of the temple, had not corrected the evil things that his sons were doing, who were also priests of the temple in Shiloh, that because they were ripping people off all the time, making themselves rich and fat at the expense of the people who would come to offer sacrifices, that God tells Samuel, now you go and tell Eli exactly what I said. And he's only about 6 years old at this time. But he goes and Eli says, tell me everything God said to you. Don't hold anything back. And so he hears that his sons are going to die a horrible death. He's going to die very soon. And that everything from his family's line is going to be wiped out because of the infidelity and the abhorrent behavior that was going on there in Shiloh, and because he had done nothing to settle them down. So at that moment, when he tells all of that to Eli, Samuel becomes this first of Israel's prophets and judges. And he has that continuing job of bringing bad news as well as good news to the people. Remember that he's the one that has to anoint Saul as king. And he tries to tell the people, now, you keep asking God for a king. You keep browbeating God over this. So God says, okay, I'll give you a king. But do you know what you're going to get when you get a king? You're going to get somebody who's going to impose taxes on you. You're going to have somebody who's going to take the best of your vineyards and anything that you have from produce or anything that you bake. He's going to take the best of it because he's going to need it for his army. And oh, and by the way, he's going to be taking your sons to be in his army, and he's going to be taking your daughters to be support for all this other stuff that's going on. So, do you still want a king? And they want to be like everybody else, so that's what happens. And then later on, he has to tell Saul that he's lost God's favor, that he's been counted out, and that there's going to be a new king, David. And then Samuel's life continues on through all of the ups and downs of that time with Saul and against David, and David running away, and the whole business. But the point is that his life, his call, was not an easy one It was fraught with peril. He had to go around various times secretively, or at least make up stories so that Saul wouldn't come after him. He eventually does die at old age because God had protected him. But nevertheless, it was a challenge. And St. Paul, in the second lesson today, talks about how he's talking about himself first of all, but making it obvious to the fellow Christians that what we carry with us in a very fragile container, like the big clay pots that they used to ship wine in, that we are these fragile vessels that contain a great gift, but yet we are always in danger of being broken. Broken either by our own decisions or by somebody else. We are always being called to bear witness to Jesus and his truth and his love and his mercy. But because of circumstances, we oftentimes are pressured by not wanting to make people upset or not wanting to lose a friendship or alienate somebody in our family, that we will pull back. We won't say what we really know we ought to say. We won't say it because we're afraid of the consequences. And yet, over and over and over again, we see that those consequences are ultimately worth the price that we have to pay. Because we don't want to anger somebody or hurt somebody's feelings by speaking the truth to them, by telling them that maybe what they're doing is wrong, or the way that they're going about something is hurtful. It's against what Christ would say, what God would want us to do. And we see it and we speak about it, and yet, what we say is rejected, or they get mad at us, and we figure that all is lost. But it's not all lost. And that's why, even in the gospel today, Jesus does not shrink back from saying what he needs to say. He's challenging the leaders on their understanding of the Sabbath. And, we've heard this any number of times. But again, he's trying to get them to move back to what the lawgiver wanted when he gave that law about the Sabbath. Did he give the law for the Sabbath so that they would be enslaved to these rules? Or was it God's initial intention to give them a time of rest so that they could recover from a hard week and be able to enter fully into the rest that God wanted them to have in this life, to understand fully what it meant to be a follower of Yahweh? Did he want them to be imprisoned in some kind of rule that if something happened, that it was wrong to feed somebody if they were hungry? Or if you're hungry yourself, to do what the apostles were doing, picking off the heads of grain, and be condemned because they were working on the Sabbath day, when all they were doing was trying to eat to sustain their lives? Or the man who's crippled, and Jesus heals him on the Sabbath? How dare you heal somebody on the Sabbath? Even after Jesus says, is it lawful to do something good on the Sabbath day or not? And they won't answer. Instead, they decide it's time to go out and start plotting against him. But everything in each of these readings today seems to speak, at least to me, this is why I'm sharing it with you, of the demands that are made when we are following God, when we are disciples. We are those who are called sometimes in our own circumstances, in our own lives, to say difficult things that need to be said for somebody else's benefit, for somebody else's salvation. But we many times will find every possible way around, and I include myself in this, that to try to avoid it, or to find a way of saying it, so that maybe it's not as strong as it might have been, or maybe not as pointed as it could have been. But nevertheless, if we refuse to do it, if we refuse the opportunity, then we're like those who shrink back from the persecutions that act, that will give in order to go along. But that's not our call. And the one ultimately that we answer to wants us to be faithful all the way, just like he was faithful all the way. Understanding us, taking compassion on us when we fail, knowing us through and through better than we know ourselves through the psalm that we have today, as it proclaims. This God knows what we're capable of. He made us. He knows what we can do. He knows what he wants us to do. He wants us to discover what he wants us to do and know that we will have the strength to do it, to live in it, and to suffer the consequences of it for his sake. Christians are oftentimes, down through the ages, the people called to speak the truth to power. Not because we try to be political, but because we proclaim the truth that comes from God. And that's what we have to take into account. So, we ask the Lord today to strengthen us in our resolve, to strengthen our desire to be faithful, to strengthen our desire to speak the truth in love to the people that we know, the people that we are called to serve, the people that we rub elbows with every day, or rub shoulders with, so that we can do the work that we have been given to do, and to encourage us, to strengthen us, to remind us who we are. Jesus, again today in this Eucharist, gives us himself.